It's 2016. Our new neighbors invite our family over for our nighttime barbecue. My mom and my dad and my sister and I met in their backyard at like 8 o'clock. This is the first time that I personally met them. It's just a husband and wife and a teenage boy. I quickly learned the boy's name is Jeremy. The husband seems to be the nicest of them all. There's something called about the wife, and the son Jeremy seems to have some kind of mental or social issues because he won't talk at all. He constantly looks all over the place, and he seems to be really sad or gloomy. I also catch him staring at me a few times. Each time, I grow increasingly uncomfortable around him and try even harder not to look at him anymore. After eating a burger and hot dogs each, our parents pretty much talked to his parents. I waited a little bit before sneaking back to our house because I was bored and uncomfortable. The next day I walked to school, since I lived 2 blocks away from the high school. I turned my head around a few hours after passing our neighbor's house and see someone jump behind a tree as if to be hiding. I turned back in front of me and started to walk faster. I get to the last block before the school and turn around again. This time, I see the same person hiding in a bush in front of someone's house. It's Jeremy. I can tell by his long hair, and he's looking right at me. I walk as fast as I can without running and make it to the school safely a minute later. When I got home that day and told my parents, and they go over and talk to the neighbors. When my parents come back to talk to me, I learned from them that Jeremy is apparently not like the other kids. According to his parents word for word, that also seemed to be enough explanation for my parents to tell me to just ignore him, as if him following me to school wasn't an insanely creepy thing to do. Later on, I go outside to sit on the patio and do my homework, and just as Jeremy and his creepiness come to mind, I turn to look at the neighboring house, up at the only window that overlooks our back. And there he is. Jeremy is sitting at that window looking at me, but as he notices me, he quickly hides. I ran inside and told my parents, and they once again quoted what his parents said and told me not to worry about him. Later that night, after texting friends and whatnot in bed, I finally put my phone down on the desk and rolled on my site to go to sleep. A certain amount of time that I can't remember passes before I hear a click at my window, and then suddenly, my window slides open. Without even knowing who's there, I scream at the top of my lungs, and soon my parents come rushing inside, all while I'm pressing up against the wall in shock as someone climbs through my window into my room. My parents turn on the lights, revealing Jeremy holding a large kitchen knife. Everyone screams, including my father, as he comes and grabs me to pull me out of the room. The 4 of us all rushed to the neighbor's house to tell them. The man next door leads us into our own house and grabs his son when he finds him in the living room. He snatches the knife from his hands and tugs him out of the house. My dad sends all of us inside as he stays outside screaming at the man next door. Moments later, he comes back inside and calls the police to get a restraining order. My dad promised those neighbors a living hell if they were not moved out by the next week. The police come and take Jeremy away, probably to some kind of place for people with mental disabilities, not a regular jail. Moving along to a week later, Jeremy didn't stay in that house anymore. We don't know where he stays now, but we've never seen him since. My early days after graduating college, I didn't have a lot of money, so I had to rent an apartment with someone else who I had never met before. He'd become my roommate, and his name was Randall. At first, he seemed easy enough to get along with. He didn't talk too much, but he had a heavy Spanish accent. The room I'd be getting was already furnished, and that was one of the appealing factors to this apartment. It had a twin-sized bed tucked in the corner, a nice-sized dresser, a closet, and a TV stand in another corner of the room. There were a bunch of stuffed animals sitting on the dresser, though which I found a bit odd, most notably, a big teddy bear facing the bed. When I asked Randall about the stuffed animals He gave a really loud laugh and said his room had the same thing. He recommended I leave them be as to show respect to the landlord. I didn't really talk to Randall much that first day. Other than that, I spent most of my time unpacking my clothes and supplies and setting up my TV. When I was laying in bed watching TV that night, I thought I heard something. It was a very brief noise, but it was definitely audible, and it sounded like some kind of small electronic component. I chalked it up to being a house noise and continued my show. The next day, Randall wasn't home all day. I didn't know if or where he worked, but I just assumed he was at work. That night when I was in my room watching TV, I heard the front door open, and Randall walked through the hall to his room before shutting the door. A little later, I was getting changed into my pajamas when I heard the same sound from the night before. This time, without the TV noise in the background, so I heard him much clearer. It was definitely some kind of electronic device, but I didn't know what or where. It still didn't seem like a big deal, so I got into my bed and started reading my current book, then went to sleep. The next day I saw Randall when I came home after work, and he asked me what book I was reading. At first, I didn't get the question, but then he said he was talking about the book that I was reading in my room. I looked at him in silence of confusion. I asked him how he knew I was reading a book, and he said in his heavy Spanish accent that he had to go into my room just to take something out that he left in there, and that's when he noticed the book. I asked him nicely not to go into my room anymore. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lock on the door, so I couldn't stop him when I wasn't home. That night, when I grabbed my book from under my bed, I stopped and wondered, how would he see my book if I had it under my bed? Thinking about this now creeped me out, and I was in no mood to read anymore. I looked around the room as I thought to myself. Then I noticed that big teddy bear on the dresser again. Now it was angled so perfectly to face me in the bed. Then I had a scary thought. I stood up and walked over to the bear, grabbed it, and looked closely into its eyes. I felt my heart skip a beat when I realized there was a camera in one of the eye holes. I threw the thing into the corner of the room and went to Randall's door and tried opening it. His door apparently had a lock because it wouldn't open, but I knew he was in there. I pounded on the door, screaming his name, but he wouldn't answer. I saw the light sneaking in through the bottom of the door go dark as I assumed he turned off the light. I went back to my room and called the landlord. I explained everything and told him I'm leaving right now, and I had a valid reason to void the contracts. I packed a little amount of things I brought into my car and left that same night, never looking back. The landlord surprisingly never even came to me to collect the money for those few days I was there. Ever since that night, I have a phobia of stuffed bears, like I always have to turn them away so that they're not facing me. Subscribe to Tellu for more creepy and horror true stories all around the world. Comment for part 2 of this video. Thank you for tuning in.